r/AskReddit, there is a Greek proverb, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. What are the greatest examples of this in human history? Joseph Bazalgette was a Victorian engineer who masterminded London's modern sewer system in the 1860s. He foresaw the insane population growth, and when all the calculations were made on how big to bore the pipes underground, he essentially said, "Now let's double it." Now, infrastructure that would have been unable to cope in the 1960s is still in use today. Norway's sovereign wealth fund. That generation could have taken a selfish view and just taken the cash, or politicians just gone on a vote-buying spree. But it's independently invested and managed for the benefit of future generations. During the Napoleonic Wars, there was a Royal Navy admiral who, when on leave, used to wander his country estate planting oak trees to provide timber for the Navy. It's estimated they are about ready now. The old Japanese people who volunteered to clean up nuclear waste sites from the World War II bombings. They knew that they likely wouldn't live long enough to suffer the worst of the effects of radiation, so they did it to protect younger people from experiencing it and to clean up Japan for future generations. It's really heartwarming. The Cassini family map, a first-of-its-kind map of France. It took 4 generations of family members and 6 decades to complete. Imagine being that second family member. Your whole life your father works on this map, only for you to work your whole life on it while raising your son to do the same, and it takes a whole nother life for it to be completed. The giant cathedrals in Europe like Notre Dame would take over 100 years to build. So the person who started building it would work their whole life on it and know they wouldn't be alive to see it complete. Roosevelt and national parks. If he never did what he did, there wouldn't be any today. Corporate greed would have wiped it all out. In a very literal sense, the landscape gardens of Capability Brown. He carefully crafted these gardens, directing the planting of trees and bushes to create a beautiful vista, where it would take decades for the plants to actually grow to fulfill his vision. William Wilberforce. He campaigned in the British government for over 40 years to stop and prevent slavery. He was successful in abolishing the trading of slaves throughout the empire with the Slave Trade Act of 1807 and then the ownership of slaves altogether with the Slavery Abolition Act 1833. He died 3 days after hearing the Abolition Act had passed in Parliament, after a lifetime of campaigning for it. He is buried in Westminster Abbey, which is reserved for monarchs and national figures of significance. His campaign for abolition was the blueprint that other abolitionists like Lincoln soon followed up with. There are many generations living because of this man's choices. Edit, and if his good karma wasn't already high enough, he was also a founding member of the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, RSPCA. The civil rights movement. Milk knew he wouldn't be alive to see integration. Public infrastructure. People got to live to see the opening of one rail line or bridge, or several, but the integrated network of public infrastructure, that took 100 years to grow and is still growing. Susan B. Anthony spent her entire life trying to get women the vote. She was fined for attempting to vote, and spent years organizing people to fight for the cause. She died in 1906, a decade before the 19th Amendment was ratified. Koto Kawamura, mayor of a village called Fude in years 1947 to 1987. The largest project of his many years is undoubtedly the 15-meter floodgate that can be lowered to shield the village from an incoming tsunami wave. During its construction and in the years after, it was largely regarded as excessive and too expensive, costing approximately $30 million in 2011 money. If you are puzzled why it is most commonly seen calculated for year 2011 in particular, I hurry to remind you. In 2011, eastern coast of Japan was battered by a massive tsunami. Villages and towns all over were destroyed with many of their inhabitants dead or missing. Fude was the only village that stood almost completely untouched thanks to the once controversial floodgate, 27 years after its construction, and 14 years after the death of Koto Kawamura. Corrected the height, I got the numbers and units mixed up when reading up on the floodgate. It's 51 feet, or 15,5 meters, not 51 meters. The Voyager spacecraft. One of them is the only object that's left the solar system. They're still sending back data. And they're each carrying a gold record encoded with information, our planet's greeting card to the cosmos. It's hard to overstate how much that project changed humanity's knowledge of the solar system. The Voyager probes were crucial to discovering volcanoes on Jupiter's moon Io, the first volcanic activity confirmed outside of Earth. Before the Voyager mission, Earth-based telescopes thought there were only a handful of rings around Saturn. Voyager found thousands of rings there, found thin ring systems around 2 other outer planets, found dozens of moons, and more other information than one comment can do justice to. NASA is still planning future missions based on information the Voyager spacecraft discovered. If alien life gets discovered on Europa or Titan, you can thank the Voyager engineers and scientists. Most of them could have earned far more money in the private sector. Being part of this effort was their dream job. And they won't see this work through to the end. They can't. Voyager began the planning stages 50 years ago. Human lives just aren't long enough. And they knew it. Edit. There's a fully functional third Voyager craft that was never launched. NASA built it and kept it on Earth for engineers to use in troubleshooting if the 2 Voyager probes in outer space ever ran into unexpected problems. That third Voyager craft spends most of the time on display at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory facility in California, in the Von Karman Auditorium. Every year in the month of June, JPL conducts tours open to the public. For security reasons they can't let a whole lot of people on site, but the tour itself is free. Applications opened on April 3rd. JPL is usually described as in Pasadena, but it's actually in the smaller nearby city of La Canada Flintridge. If you can snag a ticket, you'll spend part of the tour face to face with that third Voyager craft, and you might also get to see JPL's moon rock. https://www. JPL. NASA. gov/events/tours/views. That's not a Greek proverb. It's the invention of a 20th century Quaker writer, whose creation was appropriated in the 1990s by politicians in the United States Congress. They added the byline, Greek proverb, to make themselves seem more intelligent. King Afonso III of Portugal started the plantation of pine in Leiria in the 13th century, which is now known as the Pinhal de Leiria, with the intent of stopping the advancement of sand dunes. It was then expanded to its current size by King Dinis between 1279 and 1325. And it's said that every time they cut trees, they would plant some more, so it would never disappear. Besides this great role in stopping the dunes, and thus protecting the agricultural areas, the Pinhal de Leiria is most known for supplying the wood used in the ships during the Portuguese discovery period, which ushered the country into its greatest period of prosperity. It may have not been planted with that objective, but the kings that did it over many decades, did it knowing that they wouldn't get many benefits in their lifetime, and it coincidentally ended up being of great importance centuries later. And in 2017, 86% of it was burned down in forest fires, and because our government is incompetent, it is basically all destroyed still, with less than 50% of the burned area being replanted, and most of it being replanted by the normal plant growth that happens, not by any government action. Any scientific research that seems like a total waste of time and money right now, like the space race, medicines, nuclear fusion, etc. Some people might say we should just focus on improving morality and social justice, which is important, don't get me wrong, but let's be real, humans are dumb as rocks and we're always screwing things up. So, I'm hoping that eventually we'll come up with some quick fixes that keep us from wiping ourselves out as a species. A lot of the examples in this thread are ones I've heard before, though they're still great. One I don't see mentioned often is the written Korean language, Hangul. One dude, King Sejong, basically sat down and created a whole alphabet so people wouldn't have to continue using the adopted Chinese Hanja that were complicated and difficult to learn. His goal was to increase literacy among all levels of society, not just the wealthy elite who had the time and resources to learn Hanja. It received a lot of pushback from the wealth elites, of course, but following the end of Japanese colonialism in the early 20th century it gained popularity and is now the official written language in both North and South Korea. Japanese people aged 60 or older volunteered to fix problems in the Fukushima nuclear power plant, knowing that they would probably die of natural causes before the radiation damaged them in the long run. I don't know if they actually did it though. I'm more interested to know when and why so many old people stopped planting and caring about the trees to begin with. It's not as shady these days as the shade they enjoyed in their youth from their elders. ETA, y'all know I'm not really talking about trees, right? Nye Bevan. Created the NHS in 1948, died in 1960. Absolute legend. Sadly his legacy has been slashed to tatters and continues to take damage. My friend's wife, an organic chef and farmer, got cancer and died in the prime of life, leaving behind a grieving widower with a preschool child. As she lay dying, she got up and planted the next crop of vegetables, which she knew would not be harvested by her. Her memorial was held in a big greenhouse on the cooperative farm. People shared foods made from her recipes, with her vegetables. She literally lived this proverb. Mabel Ping Hwali was a suffragette. But because she was not a US citizen, she knew that even if she succeeded she would still not be able to vote. Insulin patent was sold for $1. We managed to fuck that one up. But it counts as planting the trees, even if we're too stupid to sit under the shade. Mendel discovered, literally, the seeds of the hereditary system in the mid-19th century, but if I recall well nobody took it seriously until the early 20th century, like 30 years after his death. Most of Jimmy Carter's actions. Bridges. You didn't do anything to earn that bridge. You didn't ask for it, pay for it, or build it yourself. You came into existence with a convenient way to cross natural barriers that would otherwise be massive detours to travel. My favorite is easily the tree root bridges in Meghalaya. Meghalaya has a monsoon season where they get the vast majority of their annual rainfall, so the many small streams turn into impassable raging rivers. In order to get around, they developed a method of making very strong bridges by stringing the roots of the trees so that they grow across the chasms. This was obviously a slow process that would take several generations of caring for the trees to complete. In the end, after passing the knowledge and responsibility down to their children, and their children's children, they would have a strong bridge that could last hundreds of years. I'm sure there are more splendid examples, but for me it's every single act of kindness we do without expecting something in return. Every time we make someone feel good, or we act honorable even when we know it won't really benefit us. The best things in the world doesn't always come from famous men doing great things. It just as often comes from the millions and millions of people living their lives doing small acts of kindness and empathy in their everyday lives. That is how we inspire others to do the same, and I guess that isn't as grand as planting a whole tree, but maybe it's like being one of the grass straws that makes the ground softer to walk on. Joseph Bazalgette, the man who designed London sewers in the 1860s, said, "Well, we're only going to do this once and there's always the unforeseen," and doubled the pipe diameter. If he had not done this, it would have overflowed in the 1960s. Everyone that took their polio vaccine, you never get your childhood back, and none of those kids that suffered from polio will either. literally any country with a robust social safety net. Sorry I'm a bit late to the party. But the mayor of Fude, in Japan during the 70s to 80s when he was young, he survived a tsunami in 1933, saw bodies being dug up during the aftermath. He then went into politics to get a wall built to stop another tsunami that he knew would happen again. It began construction in 1972, took 12 years to build, and the town considered it a huge tax waste of taxpayers' money. Fast forward to 2011, the town was in direct line of the worst tsunami to ever hit Japan. The village was barely touched. Unfortunately, he passed away in the late 80s. But he is considered a hero. He never got to see his efforts fulfilled. But he saved the lives of many people in his village even after his death. His name was Kotaku Wamura. https://www.google.com/amp/s/www. Daily Mail. Co. UK/news/article 1386978/amp/ The Japanese mayor laughed building huge sea-wall village left untouched tsunami. HTML. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you have enjoyed this video and subscribe to never miss an upload.